I never thought I'd be here, writing this story on a platform like Reddit, reflecting on how I went from a broke, struggling student to running my own multi-million-dollar company. Honestly, I still can't believe it's real. But the journey, with all its pain, challenges, and unexpected turns, has shaped me into someone I could never have imagined becoming. Let me start from the beginning. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business. My family wasn't poor, but we weren't rich either. My parents worked hard, and they expected the same from me. They always said that the key to success was working hard, getting good grades, and finding a stable job. The problem was, I hated the idea of a stable job. It felt like the ultimate trap, a life of doing the same thing over and over again, day in and day out. I was in high school when I first started thinking about entrepreneurship. I didn't have any role models or mentors, but I had an itch. I wanted to build something. My first venture? A small t-shirt printing business. I didn't know much about the logistics of running a business, but I had a couple of friends who were into graphic design, so we figured we could create custom shirts and sell them. We set up a website. It was terrible, by the way, printed a bunch of designs, and sold them at local events and online. It was a disaster. We didn't even make back what we spent on the t-shirts, let alone cover the website fees. But I didn't let it stop me. I realized that I needed to learn, and more importantly, I needed to get better at understanding business, marketing, and finances. That's when I decided to major in business in college. College was a tough time for me. I had zero experience with money management, and like most college students, I was living paycheck to paycheck. There were nights when I didn't have enough to eat, and I'd be scrolling through Reddit, reading stories of people who managed to build amazing businesses from the ground up. It felt both inspiring and discouraging. I would tell myself that I could do it too, but doubts kept creeping in. I started small side hustles to make ends meet, like offering freelance writing services and doing odd jobs for people I met in my college town. But then, during my senior year, everything changed. One day, I came across a thread about dropshipping on Reddit. It was a concept I had heard about before but never really took seriously. A few entrepreneurs were discussing how they were making significant money by selling products online without ever holding inventory. Intrigued, I spent the next several weeks reading everything I could about dropshipping, how to find suppliers, how to market products, how to set up a website. I spent late nights learning how Facebook ads worked and experimenting with different strategies. I started my first dropshipping store with around $500 that I scraped together from various gigs. It was a small, niche store focused on pet accessories. I had no idea if it would work, but I was determined. I created a website, found a supplier on AliExpress, and began running ads on Facebook. The first few weeks were painful. I didn't make a single sale. I tweaked my ads, changed the design of the website, and tested new products. Slowly but surely, things started to pick up. After a couple of months, I made my first sale, a small $10 pet collar. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Fast forward a year, and I had turned that $500 investment into a thriving online store that was generating thousands of dollars in profit each month. But despite this success, I was still struggling. The business wasn't sustainable. I was relying on paid ads, and I didn't have a long-term plan. I didn't have a solid brand, and I didn't own the products I was selling. I knew I needed to scale, but I didn't know how. That's when I came across the concept of building my own product line. I decided to take the plunge and create a line of high-quality pet accessories, manufactured in the US. I took out a loan to fund the initial order, which was a huge risk. I remember being terrified that it would fail, that I would lose everything I had worked for. But somehow, it worked. The products were high quality, and the brand I built resonated with people. Slowly but surely, I started growing my customer base, getting organic traffic, and building a loyal following. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. A few months after launching my own product line, I faced my first major crisis. My supplier, the one I had been working with for years, suddenly raised their prices. It was a devastating blow, and I wasn't sure how to react. I couldn't afford to pay the higher prices, and I didn't want to pass the increase on to my customers. I had to make some tough decisions. I found a new supplier who could provide the same quality at a better price, but the transition wasn't easy. It took weeks to get everything right, changing packaging, testing samples, adjusting my marketing. I also had to figure out how to manage cash flow better and optimize my inventory. By the time I graduated from college, I had a real business, something I could finally be proud of. But the work didn't stop. The next few years were a blur of long days, countless lessons, and learning to manage a team. I hired a small group of people to help with customer service, product design, and marketing. I began to invest in automation tools and software that could streamline my operations. Over time, I scaled the business and diversified into other products. The revenue grew, and so did the headaches. There were months where I barely slept, but I knew that failure wasn't an option. Today, my company is worth over $10 million, and we've expanded into a variety of industries. We're no longer just a pet accessory brand. We've developed partnerships with influencers, built a reputation for exceptional customer service, and even launched our own charity arm to help animals in need. But even with all of the success, I still look back at that moment when I made my first sale and wonder how far I've come. The hardest part of entrepreneurship isn't the work. It's not the long hours or the constant grind. It's the mental and emotional roller coaster. It's the constant self-doubt, the imposter syndrome, and the fear of failure. There are still moments when I question myself, but I've learned to embrace those feelings instead of running from them. If there's one thing I wish I could tell anyone thinking about starting their own business, it's this. It will be hard, and it will be uncomfortable. But you have to keep going. You will fail, you will hit roadblocks, and you will face challenges you never imagined. But if you keep pushing, if you keep learning, and if you surround yourself with the right people, you can make it. The key is resilience. So, yeah, I'm not where I thought I'd be. I'm not rich in the traditional sense, but I'm wealthy in experiences, lessons, and the ability to do something I love every day. And that's worth more than any paycheck. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I remember the day I decided to quit my job. I had been working at a mid-tier marketing agency for 3 years, and despite the fact that I had a stable paycheck, decent benefits, and a clear career trajectory, I felt suffocated. It wasn't that I hated my job. In fact, I liked the people I worked with, and the work itself was interesting. But there was something in my gut telling me that this wasn't where I was meant to be. That feeling had been brewing for months, slowly growing louder until it finally reached a tipping point. It all started when I attended a local entrepreneur meetup on a whim. A friend of mine had been raving about it for weeks, telling me how inspiring it was and how he'd met so many interesting people. I wasn't sure if it was my thing, but I decided to go, if only to see what all the fuss was about. Little did I know that one evening would completely change the course of my life. The meetup was held in a small co-working space in the heart of the city, a place that smelled faintly of coffee and had a certain energy to it. The moment I walked in, I was greeted by a room full of people who all seemed to be talking about one thing: business. Some were in tech, others in design, a few in food. But the common thread was that they were all creating something of their own. There was no talk of bosses, no mention of corporate politics, just pure excitement about the work they were doing. I felt like a fish out of water, but at the same time, I couldn't help but be intrigued. I started chatting with a few people, and one conversation in particular stood out. I met a guy named Mark, who had recently left his corporate job to start an e-commerce business selling eco-friendly products. He was passionate, knowledgeable, and incredibly positive. Mark told me how he had initially struggled but kept pushing through because he believed in the mission. He explained the importance of staying persistent, especially when times got tough, and how it all paid off in the end when his business started to take off. That conversation stuck with me for weeks. I found myself replaying it over and over in my mind. It was the spark I needed. I had always been interested in entrepreneurship, but I had never been brave enough to take the leap. Like many people, I had an endless list of reasons to stay in my comfortable job: student loans, the fear of failure, and the security of a paycheck. But what Mark said made me realize that the only thing holding me back was me. I spent the next few months researching business ideas, testing out different side projects, and learning as much as I could. I knew I had to start small. I wasn't about to quit my job and throw all my savings into a risky venture without some sort of validation. So, I started a blog. It wasn't much at first, just a simple site where I wrote about marketing strategies, tech trends, and a few personal reflections. But I focused on making it useful to others. I didn't expect it to become a full-fledged business, but over time, the blog began to gain traction. Slowly but surely, people started reading it, sharing it, and even leaving comments. I'll admit, the first few months were discouraging. There were times when I wondered if I was just wasting my time. I wasn't making any money, and I didn't have a clear idea of how to monetize it. But then, something interesting happened. A brand reached out to me. They wanted to sponsor one of my blog posts. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was a start. For the first time, I realized that this could actually work. At the same time, I kept working my full-time job. I was balancing the blog, my regular responsibilities, and trying to maintain some sort of social life, which felt like juggling flaming swords. But it was worth it. Each new milestone, whether it was gaining more followers or securing a paid sponsorship, kept me motivated. Finally, after a year of side hustling, I decided I was ready to take the leap. I quit my job. No more safety net. I had saved up enough money to survive for 6 months without income, but I knew that the pressure was on. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I was scared, yes, but more than that, I was excited. For the first time, I had the chance to create something entirely my own. I threw myself into my work, learning everything I could about growing a business. I refined my blog, optimized my website, and started to experiment with new income streams. I added affiliate marketing, created digital products, and started offering consulting services. Every new step felt like a gamble, but every success, no matter how small, fueled my determination. The first few months were tough. I didn't make as much money as I had hoped, and there were times when I questioned my decision. But instead of giving up, I doubled down. I focused on content creation, building relationships with other entrepreneurs, and listening to my audience. I made adjustments, improved my services, and kept pushing forward. Slowly but surely, things began to improve. It took about a year before I felt like I had finally found my groove. My income from the blog had grown steadily, and I had expanded my business beyond just the blog. I had started a podcast, launched online courses, and even hired a few part-time employees to help with the workload. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. Looking back, I can honestly say that quitting my job was the best decision I ever made. It wasn't easy, and there were countless moments of self-doubt and fear. But those moments were part of the journey, and they made the successes even sweeter. I learned that entrepreneurship isn't about taking big risks all the time. It's about persistence, resilience, and adaptability. It's about finding what works for you and not being afraid to pivot when necessary. Now, 3 years into my business, I'm in a place I never thought I would be. I work for myself, I have the freedom to choose how I spend my time, and I get to help others build their own businesses. It's not always glamorous. Some days are harder than others, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. To anyone reading this who's thinking about taking the leap, do it. Take the first step. It's going to be scary, it's going to be difficult, and you're going to make mistakes. But if you're willing to learn and grow, you'll come out stronger on the other side. And who knows? You might just find yourself in a place where you're more successful and fulfilled than you ever thought possible. Don't wait for the perfect time, just start. You won't regret it. So, this is the story of how I started my own business from scratch, went through some real challenges, and ended up creating something that I'm now proud of. It all started about 5 years ago when I was fresh out of college, broke, and not really sure what to do with my life. I had always been interested in technology and entrepreneurship, but I didn't have much experience in either field. My degree was in computer science, but while I was good at coding, I had no real clue how to turn that into a business. At first, I tried a few different paths. I got a job as a software engineer at a startup, thinking that would give me the experience I needed to eventually start my own company. But after about 6 months, I realized that I hated it. The corporate environment just wasn't for me, and I was sick of working for someone else. I wanted to create something of my own, but I had no idea where to start. So, I did what any frustrated 23-year-old would do. I quit my job without a backup plan. The first few months after quitting were rough. I tried out a bunch of different ideas, from building apps to launching a small e-commerce store, but nothing really gained traction. I spent most of my time trying to figure out what I was good at and what people would actually pay for. It was a mix of trial and error, frustration, and some serious self-doubt. I remember one night I was sitting in my tiny apartment, thinking I had made a huge mistake. My savings were running low, and I was starting to think maybe I should just go back to a 9-to-5 job and give up on the dream of building something meaningful. That's when the breakthrough happened. I had this random idea to build a tool that would help small businesses better manage their social media content. I had a background in coding, so I figured I could create a simple platform that would allow businesses to schedule posts, track engagement, and analyze their social media performance. It seemed like something people would pay for, and most importantly, it was something I could actually build myself. So, I got to work. I spent the next few weeks coding the platform in my spare time. I didn't have any funding, and I couldn't afford to hire anyone, so it was just me doing everything. I did the design, the back-end development, and even wrote all the copy for the site. It was exhausting, but it felt like the first time in months that I was actually working on something that had potential. After about a month, I launched the platform. I was nervous as hell. I didn't know if anyone would even care about it. I didn't have a big marketing budget or any fancy connections. All I had was a simple website, a product I believed in, and a lot of hope. At first, nothing happened. I didn't get any sign-ups. Not a single person seemed interested. But I didn't give up. I started reaching out to small business owners on LinkedIn, trying to convince them to give my platform a try. I offered free trials, asked for feedback, and just tried to learn as much as I could from anyone who was willing to listen. Slowly, things started to pick up. Some businesses started signing up, and I began to get feedback on the platform. At first, it was just a handful of users, but it was enough to keep me motivated. I took their feedback seriously and made improvements. I didn't have the resources to hire a full development team, but I was learning fast, and I was always open to making changes based on what my users wanted. A few months later, I had my first paying customer. I still remember that day. I was sitting at my desk, checking my email, and there it was, a payment confirmation for the monthly subscription to my platform. I could hardly believe it. It was only $29.99, but it felt like a huge win. Someone, a complete stranger, had trusted me enough to pay for my product. From there, things started to snowball. I kept improving the platform, adding new features, and responding to customer feedback. I even started hiring a few freelancers to help with design and development. By the end of the first year, I had around 200 paying customers, which was enough to cover my living expenses and give me a little extra to reinvest into the business. But even as the business started to grow, I faced some serious challenges. For one thing, I had no experience in marketing. I didn't know how to drive traffic to the website or how to build an online presence. I tried everything: Facebook ads, Google ads, content marketing, you name it. Some of it worked, but a lot of it didn't. I wasted a lot of money on things that didn't pay off. One of the toughest lessons I learned was that building a product isn't enough. You have to know how to sell it, too. I spent months trying to figure out the best way to acquire customers, and I failed more times than I care to admit. But eventually, I found a strategy that worked: content marketing. I started writing blog posts, creating guides, and sharing tips on social media. Slowly, I built an audience of people who were genuinely interested in what I was offering. It wasn't just the marketing that was tough, though. Managing a growing business came with a whole new set of challenges. I had to deal with customer support, billing issues, and the stress of keeping everything running smoothly. There were times when I thought I might burn out. I was doing everything myself, and it felt like I was constantly playing catch-up. But I stuck with it. I hired my first full-time employee, a customer support manager, and began delegating more tasks. As the team grew, I learned to let go of control and trust others to take care of the things I wasn't good at. By the end of the second year, I had over 1,000 paying customers, and the business was generating enough revenue to hire a small team. We expanded the platform, added new features, and started offering more value to our customers. It wasn't an overnight success, but it felt like we were finally building something that could scale. Fast forward to today, and my business is thriving. We have hundreds of thousands of users, and the platform is used by small businesses all over the world. It's not easy, and there are still challenges every day, but I'm proud of what we've built. Looking back, I realized that the biggest factor in my success wasn't any one decision or idea. It was the persistence and determination to keep going even when things seemed impossible. Entrepreneurship is full of ups and downs, but if you keep pushing forward, eventually you'll find your way. The journey wasn't linear, and there were so many moments where I thought about giving up. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that persistence is everything. If you have an idea and believe in it, don't give up. Keep learning, keep improving, and keep going. You never know when things will start to click. And if you're wondering, yes, I do sometimes look back and think, what if I had taken that 9-to-5 job? But then I remember what it feels like to create something from nothing and to be my own boss, and I know I made the right choice. To anyone reading this who's thinking about starting their own business, Just know that it won't be easy, but it's worth it. The road will be long, and you'll face plenty of obstacles along the way. But if you keep pushing forward, you can achieve things you never thought possible. I was working at a corporate job I hated, like so many other people in their mid-20s, trying to climb the ladder of an industry I had no passion for. The days dragged on, my energy drained by endless meetings and projects that didn't excite me. The dream I had of starting my own business seemed like a distant fantasy, something other people did, not me. But deep down, I was itching for something more, a sense of purpose that my 9-to-5 wasn't providing. It all started one day during lunch. I was scrolling through social media, feeling like I was wasting my life away, and I stumbled upon an ad for an online course on digital marketing. At first, I rolled my eyes. Another gimmicky course, I thought, but something about it intrigued me. It wasn't the first time I'd considered trying something new, but this was different. It felt like a sign. The course was relatively inexpensive, and I figured, what's the harm in learning something new? Worst case, I waste a few hours. I signed up that afternoon. That night, I watched the first few videos and felt my interest grow. It was like a light bulb had gone off. The idea of starting an online business became real for the first time. I didn't need to be in an office all day. I didn't need to wait for someone's permission to do something meaningful. I could create something of my own, right from the comfort of my living room. I was hooked. I'll be honest, the first few months were brutal. I spent evenings and weekends diving into courses, learning the ins and outs of social media, website design, email marketing, and SEO. I didn't know much, but I was driven. I even started a blog about personal development in my free time, just to put everything I was learning into practice. The blog had no real audience at first, but I didn't care. I was getting better, and that was enough. The real breakthrough came when I launched my first small product, a simple ebook about time management. I was still working full-time, so I did everything in the evenings after my day job. It was exhausting, but I felt like I was building something for the first time in my life. I spent weeks working on it, writing, designing, and setting up an email funnel to promote it. I had no idea if it would succeed, but one day, after I'd launched it, I saw my first sale come through. It was a rush. Someone, a complete stranger, had bought my ebook. I was over the moon. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was proof that my hard work had paid off, even just a little bit. That feeling of accomplishment fueled me to keep going. Over the next year, I refined my product and started promoting it more aggressively. I posted on social media, reached out to influencers for collaboration, and optimized my website for SEO. Slowly but surely, my sales grew. It wasn't fast or easy, but it was progress. I started building an email list of people who were interested in my content, and I started offering them more value in the form of newsletters, tips, and free resources. My audience began to trust me. The first 6 months were a struggle. I wasn't making enough to quit my day job, but I was starting to see the potential of what I could create. I spent evenings and weekends working on my side hustle, sometimes sacrificing sleep, but the grind felt different this time. I was working on my own terms, and that made all the difference. Eventually, I reached a tipping point. My side business was earning a decent income, enough to cover my bills and then some. I was faced with a tough decision. Do I stay at my corporate job and keep building this thing on the side, or do I take the leap and go full-time into my business? I remember sitting at my desk one day, staring at my computer screen, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. This was the moment that would determine my future. The decision wasn't easy. I had a steady paycheck, benefits, and job security, but I also had this burning desire to go all in. After a lot of sleepless nights and weighing the pros and cons, I decided to quit my job and pursue my business full-time. I'll never forget that moment when I handed in my resignation letter. It felt like I was finally in control of my own destiny. The first few months of being a full-time entrepreneur were a whirlwind. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, unsure of what I was doing, but there were also days when I woke up excited to work on my business. The freedom was liberating. I could finally set my own schedule, take vacations when I wanted, and focus entirely on growing my business. I didn't have to ask for permission or sit through pointless meetings. It was everything I had dreamed of. But the challenges didn't stop just because I was working for myself now. If anything, they multiplied. I had to figure out how to manage my own finances, keep track of taxes, and hire contractors to help with areas I wasn't skilled in, like graphic design and web development. I made mistakes, of course, but I learned from every one of them. I kept pushing forward, refining my processes, and growing my brand. I also started investing in my education even more. I hired business coaches, attended conferences, and read books on marketing and entrepreneurship. The more I learned, the more I realized how much I still had to learn. But the hunger for knowledge was real, and with every step, I became more confident in my abilities. My business began to grow faster, and soon, I was making more than I ever did in my corporate job. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. From that first sale of my ebook to where I am today, it's been a roller coaster. I've built a brand that now serves thousands of customers, and I've even been able to hire a small team to help me manage the day-to-day operations. The stress is still there, and the pressure is real, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. If there's one thing I've learned through this journey, it's that the only thing standing between you and your dreams is action. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment or for everything to be perfect. Start where you are, with what you have, and build as you go. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Entrepreneurship isn't a straight line to success. It's full of twists and turns, but every obstacle is a chance to learn and grow. I didn't have any special skills when I started. I wasn't born with an entrepreneurial mindset. I just decided one day that I wanted more, and I went after it. If I can do it, so can you. I've always been the kind of person who enjoys challenges, but my entrepreneurial journey didn't start with the usual sparks of inspiration or big visions of success. It all began with a simple problem that needed a solution and a little bit of frustration. I grew up in a small town where not much ever seemed to change. My family was middle class, and we always had just enough to get by. But my parents taught me that hard work and persistence were the key to anything worth achieving. Despite my small-town upbringing, I always had big city dreams. I wanted to prove to myself and to others that I could make it in a world much bigger than the one I grew up in. After high school, I moved to the city for college. It was a big adjustment, but I thrived in the hustle and bustle. I studied business, not because I had some grand plan, but because I enjoyed learning how the world worked. It was during these years that I began to notice something that would eventually change the trajectory of my life. I was always broke in college. Like, really broke. Most of my peers came from wealthier families, and they could afford to buy the latest gadgets, go out for dinners, and travel on weekends. I had to get creative to make ends meet. I remember getting my first taste of entrepreneurship when I started selling textbooks to my classmates. Some of my peers didn't care enough to buy new books, so they'd happily buy used ones from me at a discount. I ended up learning about supply and demand in the real world and made a bit of pocket money in the process. But that wasn't enough. My entrepreneurial instincts were starting to itch. One day, I was walking around the city when I saw a crowd of people gathered outside a food truck. I went up to ask what was going on and found out that they were selling some of the best tacos I had ever tasted. This was a light bulb moment. I had always loved food, and I had a knack for finding cool, hidden gems in the city. What if I could bring food culture to people who didn't have the time or knowledge to find these places on their own? I figured it could be something big, but how? After doing some research, I realized there was a huge gap in the market for food delivery services that focused on local, small-scale, high-quality restaurants instead of the big chains. But there was one major problem. I had no money. I was in my third year of college, and I couldn't even afford to get my car fixed, let alone start a business. The idea stuck with me, though. I started asking around, talking to anyone who would listen. Some laughed and told me it was too big of an idea for someone with no experience. Others told me that if I wanted to do it, I would need to have a lot more money than I had at that time. I knew that wasn't true, but it was still a big hurdle. I decided to take a small but necessary step forward. I started saving. I cut out any unnecessary spending, took up side gigs. I worked as a barista and did freelance writing, and even sold some things I didn't need, like an old guitar I hadn't touched in years. Every cent I earned went into a small account that I kept aside for my business. This process took about a year, but by the time I graduated, I had saved up just enough money to get started. I took a leap of faith, rented out a small office space, and started building the business. My plan was simple: create an app that allowed users to order food from small, independent local restaurants and have it delivered to their doorstep. But I quickly learned that it wasn't going to be that easy. The first issue I ran into was technology. I had no idea how to build an app, and hiring a developer was expensive. I tried to do it myself, using online tutorials, but let me tell you, building an app from scratch with zero coding knowledge is a nightmare. It took me months of trial and error, but eventually, I got something functional enough to launch. Next, I needed restaurants. Most of the local eateries I approached were skeptical. They didn't see the value of partnering with a random kid who had a half-built app and zero experience. But I didn't give up. I visited them in person, pitched them my idea, and offered to take a lower commission rate than the bigger delivery services. Some agreed to give me a shot, while others turned me down. But even the rejections didn't discourage me. I faced another major challenge: marketing. I was terrible at selling my service. I didn't know how to advertise to customers or how to convince people to download my app. I was literally just one guy, trying to make something happen in a world full of bigger, more established players. But I kept pushing. I started handing out flyers at local events, talked to friends about spreading the word, and ran small social media ads with a budget so small it was laughable. Slowly but surely, people started to notice. The first few months were rough. I barely made enough to cover operating costs, and I was constantly worried about failing. But something amazing started happening. Word of mouth grew. People were telling their friends about my service, and slowly, more and more restaurants were signing up. The app began to pick up steam. One day, a local food critic wrote a review about the service. The next morning, my phone was blowing up with new orders and signups. That's when I realized that things were starting to snowball. However, just when things were looking up, I hit another roadblock. My app crashed. The server couldn't handle the traffic, and for a few days, I was scrambling to fix it. The entire experience was humbling. I had to apologize to customers, offer refunds, and work late nights to keep everything running. But I didn't give up. As the business grew, I started hiring a small team to help. They were mostly college students like me, driven by the same hunger for success. Together, we worked on improving the app, expanding our restaurant base, and getting the word out. The first year was a blur of hard work, late nights, and endless problem solving. But by the time I reached my second year of operations, things were looking promising. Today, my company is one of the top food delivery services in my city. We've expanded to surrounding areas, and our team has grown. I still remember the sleepless nights, the doubts, and the overwhelming feeling of being out of my depth. But I'm proud of how far we've come. Looking back, the biggest lesson I learned was simple: there's no such thing as an easy path. Every step of the way was filled with challenges and obstacles, but those are the things that make success worthwhile. If you're willing to work through the hard stuff, you'll be amazed at what you can achieve. This journey has been far from smooth, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Every failure, every setback, and every moment of doubt has shaped me into the entrepreneur I am today. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is this: don't wait for the perfect moment. Start with what you have, learn as you go, and never give up. You might be one step away from changing everything. It was early 2017 when I realized I was drowning in a sea of mediocrity. I had been working a 9-to-5 job for years, helping a company grow in ways that were impressive on paper, but ultimately didn't feel fulfilling. I was stuck. I had great friends, a comfortable salary, and a house I could afford, but something deep inside me was screaming that I wasn't living the life I was meant to live. My passion, my fire, had dimmed into something so small I could hardly recognize it anymore. One morning, after a particularly grueling team meeting, I looked around the conference room. Everyone was glued to their laptops, typing away, nodding in agreement with whatever the higher-ups were saying. I could see the burnout on their faces, the same exhaustion I felt but was too afraid to admit. I left the office early that day, went to a nearby park, and sat on a bench for what felt like hours. It wasn't the job that was killing me, it was the lack of control over my own life. At that moment, I decided I was going to do something different. I wasn't going to just exist. I was going to create. But what? I had no idea. The only thing I knew was that I had a ton of experience in the tech space, and I'd always been fascinated by the potential of small businesses harnessing the power of digital marketing. It felt like something was stirring within me, and I needed to ride that wave, even if it meant leaving everything I knew behind. For weeks, I researched. I dove into books, watched endless YouTube videos, and listened to podcasts. I'd get home from work, crack open my laptop, and start learning everything I could about digital marketing, content creation, and social media strategies. It was overwhelming at first. I wasn't a tech guru or a social media influencer, just someone with a basic understanding of how online marketing worked. But as I learned, I started to see patterns and opportunities one hadn't noticed before. I knew I had to start small. I didn't have the luxury of quitting my job right away, so I started my side hustle with a simple blog. It was nothing groundbreaking, just a space where I could write about the marketing strategies I was learning and share my insights. The blog, Growth Pulse, was born. I had no expectations. In the beginning, I was lucky if a few people clicked on my posts, but I was persistent. Every night, after work, I'd write and refine my content. I'd engage with other bloggers, join forums, and ask questions. Around 6 months into running Growth Pulse, something unexpected happened. One of my articles, titled 5 Social Media Strategies You're Overlooking, was shared by a large influencer in the digital marketing space. My website traffic exploded overnight. My email list grew, and people started reaching out for advice. I was still working my full-time job, but I was now getting paid to consult on marketing strategies, and I realized I was onto something bigger than I had initially imagined. In 2018, I took a leap of faith and quit my job. I had saved up enough money to support myself for 6 months and figured that if I couldn't make this work by then, I'd go back to the corporate world. But I wasn't going back. I couldn't. I was determined to make this business succeed. I decided to focus on providing digital marketing services to small and medium-sized businesses. They were often overlooked by the big agencies, and I saw an opportunity to offer something different, a personalized approach that larger companies couldn't provide. I started reaching out to small business owners. I created a simple website with my services, testimonials, and case studies. The first few clients were a challenge. I didn't have a big portfolio to show them, and many were skeptical. But I gave my all, working nights and weekends, crafting tailored strategies that helped my clients grow their online presence. Slowly, word began to spread. I began getting more referrals, and my reputation as someone who genuinely cared about the success of my clients grew. By the end of 2019, my business was profitable. I wasn't rolling in money, but I was finally able to pay myself a small salary, and the stress of living paycheck to paycheck was gone. I hired my first employee, a freelance writer who helped me with content creation. My days were filled with client meetings, strategizing campaigns, and overseeing the execution of projects. There was never enough time in the day, but I was doing something I loved. In 2020, the pandemic hit. My business, like many others, was faced with challenges I couldn't have anticipated. However, I didn't let fear paralyze me. Instead, I saw this as an opportunity to adapt and grow. I pivoted my services to focus on helping businesses transition online, something that many had neglected in the past. I knew I could help them not just survive, but thrive in a digital-first world. That decision was a game changer. I started getting more inquiries, particularly from local restaurants, retail shops, and service-based businesses that had to move their operations online quickly. I tailored packages to help them with everything from setting up e-commerce sites to managing their social media presence. I worked around the clock, offering advice, implementing strategies, and making sure they had the tools they needed to succeed in a difficult time. By 2021, I had built a solid team. We were now 5 employees strong, each with a different area of expertise. I was able to step back from day-to-day operations and focus on scaling the business. We developed a system for onboarding clients, managing projects, and delivering results. I also invested in new tools and technology to automate processes and improve our efficiency. We were no longer just a small business. We were a growing digital marketing agency that helped companies achieve success in a digital world. Looking back, it's almost hard to believe how far I've come. From sitting on that park bench in 2017, feeling lost and unsure of my future, to running a thriving business that helps entrepreneurs and small business owners succeed, it's been an incredible journey. The road hasn't been easy. There have been countless sleepless nights, moments of self-doubt, and setbacks that made me question everything. But through it all, I learned that the key to entrepreneurship isn't just about having a great idea. It's about persistence, adaptability, and a willingness to fail and learn from your mistakes. Today, Growth Pulse is a well-established digital marketing agency with clients across the country. I've built something that I'm incredibly proud of, not just for the success we've achieved, but for the way we've helped businesses find their voice and grow in an increasingly digital world. And while the road ahead is still filled with challenges, I'm no longer afraid. I know that I'm on the right path, and no matter what happens, I'll keep pushing forward. So, if you're sitting there right now, wondering if you should take that leap, my advice is simple: do it. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to start. The road will be messy, and it will be hard, but if you keep going, the rewards are worth it. Take the leap. The future is waiting. I want to share the story of how I went from a broke college dropout to the owner of a thriving business. It wasn't easy, and honestly, I'm still trying to figure out how I even made it this far, but I've learned a lot along the way. If you're someone who's feeling stuck, Unsure if your dreams will ever become a reality, or questioning if it's all worth it, this story is for you. So, let's start from the beginning. I grew up in a small town, and like most people there, I didn't come from a lot of money. My parents were hardworking, but they were far from wealthy. I wasn't the smartest kid in school, but I wasn't dumb either. I had average grades, and the only thing that really kept me going was my interest in technology. I remember in high school I built my first computer from scratch, a huge deal at the time, and that was when I realized I had a real passion for figuring out how things worked, not just with computers, but with businesses too. I went to college with big dreams of starting my own tech company, but those dreams were quickly squashed by reality. College wasn't what I expected. I didn't fit in, and I struggled with the academic pressures. I dropped out in my second year. My parents were disappointed, and frankly, so was I. I felt like a failure. It was the lowest point in my life. I moved back home after dropping out, and for a while, I just wandered aimlessly. I worked random jobs here and there to make ends meet, but nothing felt right. During this time, I started diving deeper into online business models, reading books, listening to podcasts, and watching YouTube videos about entrepreneurship. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I couldn't keep going down this path. One night, I was sitting on my bed, scrolling through Reddit, and I stumbled upon a post about dropshipping. I'd heard of it before, but it seemed too good to be true. Still, something about it intrigued me. After all, it was a way to start a business without a lot of upfront investment. I decided to give it a shot. I didn't have much money, but I had enough to buy a domain, set up a simple Shopify store, and run a few ads. I didn't expect much at first, just wanted to see if it could work. The first couple of months were a disaster. I spent way too much on ads, had no idea how to target the right audience, and the products I picked weren't great. But I learned something important. Failure is part of the process. I wasn't giving up. I kept tweaking my ads, researching better suppliers, and slowly, I started to see results. The first sale felt like a victory, and by the end of the first year, I had made a modest profit. It wasn't enough to quit my job, but it was enough to convince me that this could work. I continued to work my day job at a call center while building my dropshipping business on the side. I had no social life, barely any sleep, but I was determined. After about 18 months, I had scaled my store enough to quit my job and focus on the business full-time. I moved into a small apartment with cheaper rent, so I could reinvest every cent back into the business. It wasn't glamorous, but it was my new reality. Around this time, I realized I had reached a plateau with dropshipping. The margins were low, competition was fierce, and the market was becoming oversaturated. I needed to pivot. I started learning about other business models, specifically subscription boxes, and that's when things began to change. I spent months researching different niches, finally landing on one that resonated with me: eco-friendly products. I knew people were becoming more conscious of sustainability, and I figured there was potential in creating a subscription box service that delivered eco-friendly items like reusable straws, bamboo toothbrushes, and biodegradable cleaning products. The idea felt right, but I wasn't sure if the market was big enough to sustain the business. I launched the subscription box in early 2020, and to my surprise, it gained traction almost immediately. I had spent weeks building an email list through content marketing, running targeted ads on social media, and collaborating with influencers in the eco-friendly space. It was slow at first, but the customer base grew steadily. I learned that with subscription models, customer retention is just as important as acquiring new customers. So, I invested heavily in creating a community, offering exclusive discounts to loyal customers, and ensuring that each box was packed with high-quality, sustainable items. By mid-2020, the business was generating consistent revenue. I hired my first employee, a fulfillment specialist, to help with packing and shipping, and I outsourced customer service to a virtual assistant. This was a game changer. I was no longer working 18-hour days. I could focus on scaling the business instead of getting bogged down in the day-to-day operations. In 2021, we hit a major milestone. We reached 10,000 monthly subscribers. I couldn't believe it. The business was finally profitable enough to start hiring a team of full-time employees. We expanded our product offerings, launching an online store for eco-friendly goods, which allowed us to tap into a larger market outside of our subscription model. Fast forward to 2025, and the business is now generating 7 figures annually. We've expanded into international markets, launched multiple product lines, and built a loyal customer base. I've got a team of 20 employees, a warehouse, and a thriving brand that stands for sustainability and innovation. But here's the kicker. I almost gave up at so many points along the way. When my dropshipping business failed, when the subscription box started slow, when I thought I was in over my head, I could have walked away. But I didn't. I kept learning, kept growing, and kept taking calculated risks. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, but I truly believe anyone can do it if they're willing to put in the work and take those first steps, even when the path isn't clear. If you're reading this and wondering if it's worth it, it is. It's going to suck at times. You'll feel overwhelmed. You'll make mistakes. But if you keep going, it can pay off in ways you never imagined. You don't need to have it all figured out at the beginning. You just need to start. And don't stop until you get where you want to go. I don't know where I'll be in 5 years, but I do know that I'm not stopping anytime soon. If I can do it, so can you. I never thought I'd end up as a successful entrepreneur. Growing up, I wasn't the kid who ran lemonade stands or made money from mowing lawns. I was the kid who tried but failed at everything. I was always the one watching from the sidelines, admiring people who had natural talent or the ability to turn ideas into businesses. Little did I know that my failure to fit in, to follow the conventional paths, would ultimately be the reason I became a successful entrepreneur. Here's my story. It all started in college. I wasn't a great student. I was okay at best. I had a couple of interests, but nothing really stuck. One thing I was good at, though, was seeing patterns and solving problems. It wasn't the kind of thing you could major in or really advertise, but I often found myself tinkering with different projects just for the fun of it. Whether it was building small websites for fun or trying to fix broken gadgets, I had a knack for figuring things out. Still, I didn't take it seriously at first. My first real attempt at entrepreneurship came when I was in my sophomore year. I had this crazy idea that I could create an online platform to help people find used textbooks. At the time, everyone was stuck with the hassle of buying expensive textbooks at the campus bookstore or finding them on sites like Amazon for way too much. I thought, what if I could build something better? A place where people could buy, sell, and trade books easily. I had no business background. I wasn't a computer science major, and I wasn't some genius coder. But I was persistent, and I loved a good challenge. I spent months building a rudimentary website. It looked terrible, but it worked. The platform let people post their textbooks, browse available books, and contact sellers directly. I launched it, thinking I had created the next big thing. The first few weeks were tough. No one used the site, and I had a handful of friends who reluctantly posted their books just to help me out. I didn't have any money for marketing, and I certainly didn't have any experience in that department. I remember feeling discouraged at times, questioning whether I had made a huge mistake. But I kept pushing forward, learning from my mistakes, and trying to improve. One day, after months of slow growth, something finally clicked. I got a call from a local bookstore owner who had found my website and wanted to know more. He was interested in advertising his store on my platform. I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't ready for this. But I realized this could be my chance to turn things around. I met with him, explained my idea, and within a week, he was signed on as my first advertiser. The momentum started to build. Slowly but surely, people started to take notice. More people posted their textbooks, more bookstores came on board, and soon I had a small but growing community of users. However, this success didn't come without sacrifices. I barely slept, working late into the night trying to fix bugs and make improvements. I didn't have a team, just me, a few friends who occasionally helped out, and some freelance designers who gave me a break. I learned everything the hard way. The business side of things? I had no clue. Taxes, accounting, legal stuff. It was all foreign to me. I ended up making a lot of mistakes that cost me both time and money. But the real breakthrough came when I started focusing on the user experience. I realized that the platform was clunky, hard to navigate, and not intuitive. I couldn't just keep building features. I needed to make it easy for people to use. After months of redesigning, I launched a much sleeker version of the platform, one that was simple and fast. Soon after, I launched an app, making it even easier for people to access the site on their phones. That was a game changer. The growth was exponential after that. Users loved the new experience, and the advertisers followed. I began to monetize my site through ads and premium features, offering sellers the ability to pay for boosted listings. But the real turning point came when I decided to go beyond textbooks. I expanded the platform to include other college-related products, furniture, electronics, even clothing. The focus was still on the college market, But now people could buy and sell almost anything they needed as a student. By the time I graduated, I had turned my little side project into a full-fledged business. The next few years were a blur of hustle. I eventually had to hire a small team to handle the increasing workload. At the time, I was still living in my parents' basement, working out of a cluttered desk, trying to manage everything on my own. I went from being a lone operator to managing a team, learning how to delegate, motivate people, and manage a growing company. Fast forward to today, and my company has grown into a multi-million-dollar business. We have offices in 3 cities, over 200 employees, and an even larger user base. We've expanded into a number of other areas, and we've been able to raise several rounds of funding, giving us the resources to continue growing. The business is now known nationwide, and we're expanding internationally. Despite all of this, I haven't forgotten where I came from. I still think back to those early days in college when I was sitting in my dorm room, working on that crummy website. Those days shaped who I am today. They taught me that the road to success isn't linear, and that failure isn't the end. It's just part of the process. I've made plenty of mistakes along the way, and there were many times I thought about giving up. But the key to entrepreneurship is persistence, the ability to keep going, even when things seem hopeless. Success didn't happen overnight, but it did happen because I kept moving forward, learning from my mistakes, and staying focused on my goals. So if you're thinking about starting your own business or chasing a dream, don't worry if it feels like you're struggling at the beginning. Keep pushing. Don't be afraid to make mistakes or to fail, because that's how you'll learn. Trust me, the struggle is worth it in the end. You'll look back one day and realize how far you've come. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I've always had a knack for problem solving. As a kid, I was the one disassembling my toys and figuring out how they worked. I wasn't just curious. I was obsessed with understanding the mechanics behind things. Little did I know, this odd fascination would lead me down an entrepreneurial path that would change my life forever. It started in college. I wasn't exactly a straight-A student, but I had an undeniable passion for technology. My friends and I were always tinkering with gadgets, discussing ideas, and dreaming big. One night, during a random brainstorming session in our cramped dorm room, we came up with the idea of creating a mobile app. At that time, apps were just starting to gain momentum, but the market was still wide open. We didn't have much money, hell, we were all broke college students, but we had time, determination, and a ton of energy. We decided to build an app that would help people track their daily routines and habits. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but we believed that with the right user interface and a few unique features, we could create something that stood out. None of us knew how to code, but we figured we could learn. So we dove into free coding tutorials, scoured online forums, and spent countless late nights trying to piece everything together. The first version of the app was, let's just say, rough. It had bugs, poor graphics, and a user interface that looked like it was made by a 5-year-old. But despite all of its flaws, we were proud of it. We built something from scratch, and that felt like a huge accomplishment. We uploaded it to the App Store, half expecting it to sink into oblivion. But it didn't. To our surprise, the app started getting downloads. Not thousands or even hundreds of thousands, but enough for us to realize that people actually wanted something like this. We were making money, albeit small amounts. Still, it was a start. But we quickly realized that we needed to improve the app if we wanted to stand out in the crowded market. We didn't have the funds to hire professional developers or designers, so we turned to our community of users. We started gathering feedback from anyone who downloaded the app, asking them about their experience and what they wanted to see. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, but there was a recurring theme. People wanted more features, better design, and a more intuitive interface. We took this feedback seriously and went back to the drawing board. I remember pulling all-nighters, coding the new version of the app, redesigning the interface, and fixing bugs. Then, the breakthrough came. One of the features we'd added, a way to track habits based on location, turned out to be a game changer. People loved it. They could now set reminders to do things based on where they were. For example, if someone wanted to go for a run every morning, they could set the app to remind them when they were near a park. It was a simple feature, but it made the app incredibly useful. It also started getting noticed by influencers and bloggers in the productivity space. They started mentioning our app in their posts, which gave us a huge boost in visibility. We went from making a few bucks a month to making a few thousand. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to quit our part-time jobs and focus full-time on the app. We were still in college, and we lived off cheap ramen and coffee, but we were happy. We were building something that people loved, and we were doing it together. As our user base grew, we started facing bigger challenges. The app had scalability issues. Our servers couldn't keep up with the demand. There were also performance issues, and the code was starting to get messy. We needed to bring in professional help, but we didn't have the money. So we took a leap of faith and started reaching out to potential investors. We pitched our idea to anyone who would listen, and most of the time, we were rejected. It was disheartening, but we kept going. Finally, we got a meeting with a small venture capital firm that had a soft spot for college startups. The meeting was short and to the point. They liked our idea, but they didn't want to take a huge risk. They offered us a small investment, just enough to cover the cost of hiring a full-time developer and upgrading our infrastructure. It wasn't a huge deal, but it was enough to get us over the hump. With the investment, we were able to hire a developer who helped us refactor the code and build out the features we'd been dreaming of. We also hired a designer who gave the app a fresh, modern look. The app started to look professional, and it began to run smoothly. We launched a major update, and this time, the downloads came flooding in. We were featured on the front page of the App Store for the first time, and that's when things really took off. I remember the day we hit 100,000 downloads. It was surreal. I couldn't believe we'd gone from a crappy, bug-ridden app to a product that people actually loved. The money started rolling in, and we were finally able to pay ourselves a modest salary. But more than the money, it was the sense of accomplishment that kept us going. We built something that people wanted, and it was growing every day. As the years went by, the business continued to grow. We started adding new features, expanding to other platforms, and even launching a premium version of the app. The team grew, and we went from a few college kids working out of a dorm room to a full-fledged company with offices and employees. But despite the growth, we never lost sight of what made us successful in the first place: our obsession with solving problems and creating a product that people actually needed. We faced our fair share of setbacks along the way. There were moments when it felt like everything was falling apart, when the servers crashed, when a new competitor entered the market, or when we lost a key team member. But through it all, we kept going. We learned from our mistakes, iterated on our product, and most importantly, we never gave up. Now, years later, we've built a company that's worth millions. We've expanded into new markets, and our app is used by millions of people around the world. But if you ask me what the key to success is, I'd tell you it's simple: perseverance. There were countless times when we could have quit, when it would have been easier to walk away. But we didn't. We kept going, and in the end, that's what made all the difference. Looking back, I'm proud of what we've accomplished. But more than anything, I'm grateful for the journey, the late nights, the failures, the small wins, and the moments of pure joy when everything came together. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, but for those who are willing to put in the work, the rewards can be life-changing. If I could give one piece of advice to aspiring entrepreneurs, it would be this: don't quit. The road will be tough, and you'll face challenges that seem insurmountable. But if you keep pushing forward, you'll get there. You just have to believe in yourself and never give up. A little over 3 years ago, I found myself in a position where I was ready to quit my corporate job. I had been working for a large tech company for about 5 years, steadily climbing the ladder. On paper, I had it all: a good salary, stability, and a clear career path. But inside, I was restless. Every day felt like I was living on autopilot. I had become just another cog in a massive machine, and it wore on me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I needed to make a change. But here's the thing: I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no grand business ideas or innovative products brewing in my head. I didn't have a tech startup in my back pocket or a genius invention I was itching to bring to market. All I knew was that I was passionate about creating something of my own, building something from the ground up, and not having to answer to a boss who had never even met me in person. The decision to leave my job wasn't a rash one. In fact, it took me several months of soul-searching and planning before I pulled the trigger. I spent countless hours researching potential business ideas, talking to friends and family about my fears and excitement, and carefully budgeting my savings. I wasn't planning on diving in headfirst without any safety nets. I wanted to be prepared, but deep down, I knew that starting a business would involve taking risks. There was no avoiding that. Eventually, I landed on an idea. It wasn't groundbreaking or revolutionary, but it was something I had noticed in my everyday life. People struggled with meal planning. I had been following a few food blogs and was always interested in how people got creative in the kitchen, especially when it came to healthy eating. I realized that, while there were plenty of meal delivery services, few focused on the personalized aspect. Most meal planning services were one-size-fits-all, offering generic recipes or the same dishes week after week. What if I could create a service that tailored meals based on people's individual tastes, dietary needs, and health goals? At the time, I had no culinary background, no experience in nutrition, and no real idea of what it would take to launch a meal planning business. But I had a few key things going for me: a strong work ethic, an openness to learning, and the drive to make this work. So, I set out on a journey of discovery. I enrolled in online courses about nutrition, cooking, and the business of food. I started meeting with dietitians, nutritionists, and even chefs to understand what made a good meal plan and how I could make it unique. I also dove deep into the logistics of starting a business, researching everything from how to handle subscriptions to how to market a service like mine. The first major hurdle was finding a way to structure the business. I had a vision of a platform where customers could enter their dietary preferences, allergies, health goals, and preferred cuisines. From there, the system would generate personalized weekly meal plans, complete with shopping lists and recipe instructions. I wanted to make healthy eating accessible and easy for busy people who didn't want to spend hours searching for recipes or calculating nutrition. Building the platform wasn't easy. I didn't have the technical expertise to create it myself, so I hired a freelance developer to help bring my idea to life. This was a huge leap of faith. Not only was I shelling out a large portion of my savings, but I was also unsure if anyone would even be interested in the product I was offering. At the same time, I was managing my day job while trying to launch this business on the side, so sleep became a luxury. After several months of work, I finally launched the website. I was both excited and terrified. I had no idea if anyone would actually sign up, but I had done my research, and I had a feeling that there was a market for personalized meal planning. To drive traffic to the site, I started a small social media campaign, targeting people who were interested in healthy living and meal prepping. I offered discounts for early adopters and asked my friends and family to spread the word. The first few weeks were rough. The website wasn't perfect, and I had a ton of bugs to fix. But as time went on, more and more people signed up. I wasn't getting rich overnight, but the steady stream of subscribers helped keep my momentum going. The feedback I received from customers was overwhelmingly positive, and I realized that I was onto something. People loved how easy it was to use the platform, how their meal plans were tailored specifically to them, and how it took the stress out of meal planning. Some users even said it had changed the way they thought about food. As the months went by, I continued to refine and improve the service. I expanded the menu options, added new features like grocery store delivery integration, and started working with nutritionists to make sure the plans were balanced and effective. My customer base grew, and eventually, I was able to quit my day job and focus on the business full-time. Now, I won't say that it's all been smooth sailing. There have been countless obstacles along the way. I've had to deal with difficult customers, competitors entering the market, and the constant pressure to innovate. There were months where I thought about giving up, where I questioned whether I had what it took to keep going. But with each challenge, I learned something new, and each small success fueled my determination to push forward. Today, my business is doing better than I ever imagined. We have a loyal customer base, a growing team, and a much improved platform. I've expanded the company into a few new verticals, including partnerships with health coaches and fitness centers, which has opened up new revenue streams. I'm able to work on projects I'm passionate about, and I have the flexibility to spend time with my family, something I never had while working a 9-to-5 job. The business continues to evolve, and there's still so much room for growth. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. Starting a business isn't easy, and it takes a lot of hard work, sacrifice, and persistence. But I'm proud of the journey I've taken. If I had stayed in my corporate job, I'd probably still be miserable and unfulfilled. Taking that leap of faith, even without a clear plan, was the best decision I ever made. I don't regret it for a second. The moral of the story is this: if you have an idea, no matter how small or unconventional, go for it. The road to entrepreneurship isn't easy, but the rewards are worth it. You don't have to have it all figured out right away. Start small, keep learning, and stay persistent. The only thing standing between you and success is taking that first step. I never thought I'd become an entrepreneur. My journey to owning a business was a wild mix of coincidence, hard lessons, and a lot of grit. At the start, I was just like any other kid with a regular job trying to figure out life. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where dreams were bigger than opportunities. I wasn't the smartest kid, nor the most athletic, but I was always a little more curious than most. This curiosity would eventually lead me down a path I never expected. I graduated college with a degree in business administration, but honestly, I didn't have a solid plan. I ended up working in sales for a small tech company. The job was okay, but something about it felt off. It wasn't the work itself. I liked talking to people, solving problems, and helping them see how our products could make their lives better. But the corporate culture? That was suffocating. The more I climbed the ladder, the more I realized that corporate life wasn't for me. The 9-to-5 grind, the endless meetings, and the pressure to hit quotas all seemed so meaningless. It felt like I was just another cog in the wheel. Around this time, I started noticing a shift in the business landscape. The internet was changing everything. Small businesses were popping up all over the place, and people were starting to realize that they didn't need to go through traditional channels to be successful. I was watching this happen from the sidelines, feeling like I had missed the boat. But one night, as I was scrolling through Reddit, my favorite procrastination tool, I came across a post about a guy who built a successful business selling socks online. He didn't have a degree in fashion. He didn't come from a wealthy background. He just had a solid idea and the courage to try. That post stuck with me. The idea that you could take a product, market it online, and reach customers all over the world seemed like magic. I realized that if this guy could do it, why couldn't I? I didn't have much money saved up, just a few $1,000s from my sales commissions and some leftover student loan debt, but I knew that I had to at least try. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the possibilities, about how I could create something of my own. The next day, I quit my job. I know, it sounds impulsive. Looking back, it was, but the decision felt right. I remember handing in my resignation letter and feeling a strange sense of relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt free, but I was also scared. I had no idea what I was doing. The only thing I was certain about was that I didn't want to keep living the life I was living. I decided to start an e-commerce store. At the time, I had no specific product in mind, but I knew I wanted to sell something I could be passionate about. After a few weeks of brainstorming, I landed on the idea of custom-made phone cases. Everyone has a phone, and a case is something people use every day. It wasn't the most groundbreaking idea, but it was something I could execute on with the limited budget I had. I spent the next few months learning everything I could about running an online business. I scoured YouTube videos, read blog posts, and joined entrepreneur groups on Facebook. The process was slow, and there were a lot of sleepless nights. I learned about website design, Facebook ads, SEO, product sourcing, and customer service. Every little detail felt like a mountain, and I was constantly climbing. But with each small win, I gained more confidence. I started with a simple website on Shopify and found a supplier on Alibaba to create the cases. I wasn't able to afford professional photography, so I took pictures myself using my iPhone. The website wasn't pretty, the product descriptions were basic, and I had zero brand recognition, but I launched it anyway. The first sale was a huge milestone. It came after weeks of no sales, but that single order made everything feel worth it. I couldn't believe someone actually bought something from me. The next challenge was marketing. I had no idea how to reach people, but I knew social media was key. I created an Instagram account and started posting pictures of the phone cases. I didn't have a huge following, so I began reaching out to influencers and offering them free products in exchange for posts. At first, I didn't get much traction, but eventually, a few influencers with smaller followings started sharing my products. Slowly but surely, sales started to trickle in. But success didn't come easy. There were countless roadblocks. My supplier started sending me defective cases, and customers were unhappy. I didn't have enough money to handle returns, and I remember staying up late at night trying to figure out how to make things right without losing everything. There were times when I seriously thought about quitting, but every time I faced a setback, I would remind myself why I started. I wasn't going to let a few bumps in the road stop me. I kept learning, iterating, and pushing through. Eventually, the business started growing. I reinvested every penny back into the company, whether it was for better marketing, improving the website, or creating new products. My customer base grew, and soon, I was able to hire a small team to help with operations. I couldn't believe how much progress we had made in such a short time. But even when the business became profitable, the challenges didn't stop. I had to stay on top of new trends, keep up with competition, and manage the increasing complexity of running a business. I had moments where I felt overwhelmed, but I also felt a sense of pride. I had built something from nothing. The late nights, the stress, the mistakes, they all led me to this point. Fast forward to today, and I run a thriving e-commerce business with a small but dedicated team. We've expanded our product line to include other custom accessories, and we've built a strong brand identity. I no longer feel stuck in the corporate world, and I'm in control of my own destiny. But it wasn't a smooth ride, and it definitely wasn't easy. It took hard work, perseverance, and a willingness to fail and get back up again. Looking back, I can honestly say that entrepreneurship is one of the most rewarding, yet challenging things I've ever done. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: don't wait for the perfect moment. You'll never feel fully ready, and there will always be obstacles. But if you have a good idea and the determination to make it work, you can succeed. So, to anyone reading this who feels like they're stuck in a rut, take the leap. You never know where it might take you. And remember, even if you fail, you'll learn something that will help you next time. That's how I got to where I am today. I never thought I'd end up running my own business. Growing up, I had a pretty standard middle-class life. My parents were both teachers, and though we didn't have a lot of money, they made sure I had everything I needed. I was a good student, though not exceptional, and while I had some entrepreneurial ideas as a kid, I never imagined that one day I'd be running a successful startup. I went to college on a full scholarship. It wasn't Harvard or Stanford, but it was a good state school. I majored in business management, figuring that was the safest bet for landing a stable job. I was always more interested in learning the ins and outs of running a company than working for one. During college, I took on several part-time jobs to pay for living expenses. I worked at a coffee shop, a bookstore, and even tried my hand at freelance writing for a while. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught me a lot about hard work, customer service, and what it takes to make a living from something you're passionate about. When I graduated, I started looking for a job. I got a couple of interviews, but nothing was panning out. I had the skills, but no one wanted to take a chance on a fresh grad with no real-world experience. After several months of sending out resumes and getting rejection after rejection, I had a conversation with a mentor of mine, an old professor from school. He told me that if I really wanted to make it, I needed to stop waiting for a job and start creating one. At first, I laughed it off. I didn't have the capital to start my own company. I didn't even have a concrete idea of what kind of business I could run. But his words stuck with me. So, I started brainstorming. I thought about the things I was passionate about and the problems I saw in the world around me. One day, I was walking through a park near my apartment when I noticed something. There were so many people on their phones, but not one of them was interacting with the environment around them. People were lost in their screens, missing out on life. It hit me like a ton of bricks. What if there was an app that helped people disconnect from their phones and engage more with the world around them? Something that could suggest things to do, like reading a book, going on a walk, or even just talking to someone. At the time, it seemed like a simple idea, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much it could impact people's lives. I had no background in tech, but I knew that if I was serious about starting something, I had to learn. So, I dove into learning how to code. I spent months on online courses, reading books, and practicing every day. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I was getting nowhere, but I pushed through because I was determined to make this happen. Once I had a basic understanding of coding, I began building a prototype for my app. I called it Disconnect. The name was simple, but it captured what I was going for. It took me over a year to get the app to a point where I felt it was ready for the world. During that time, I also started researching business models, marketing strategies, and how to launch a product. I didn't have much money, but I didn't need a lot to get started. I was living frugally, cutting down on expenses, and using whatever I could from my savings to keep the project alive. In the first few months of building, I started feeling like it might be a lost cause. I had so many failures. The app kept crashing, the user interface was clunky, and I struggled to get feedback from potential users. But something inside me told me to keep going. I couldn't give up before I'd even had a real chance to see if this could work. Eventually, I was able to launch the first version of Disconnect. The response wasn't immediate, but it was steady. People seemed to like the concept, But there were a lot of bugs, and the app was far from perfect. So, I kept refining it. I didn't have the resources to hire a team, so I continued doing everything myself. I was coding, marketing, and even handling customer support. It was exhausting, but I loved the challenge. The breakthrough came about 6 months after the launch. I had started reaching out to influencers in the wellness and mental health space, hoping they would take a chance on my app. One of them, a popular wellness blogger, gave Disconnect a shout-out on their Instagram. Within hours, the downloads started pouring in. That was when I realized I had something. People were interested. I wasn't just chasing a pipe dream. There was a real market for what I was building. From there, things started to snowball. More influencers got involved, and the user base grew. I eventually made enough to hire a small team of developers to help me scale. We revamped the app, added new features, and invested in marketing. The hard work was starting to pay off, but there were still plenty of hurdles to overcome. A year after the first influencer shout-out, Disconnect had hit over 1 million downloads. It wasn't an overnight success, but it felt like one. I had gone from a broke college graduate with no real prospects to a business owner with a growing company. We were bringing in revenue, and I was able to pay myself for the first time since I started the company. It was a surreal moment. Today, Disconnect has evolved into something bigger than I ever imagined. We're not just an app anymore. We've created a movement. We've partnered with organizations that promote mental health and digital well-being, and our app is being used by people all over the world. I've grown my team, and we're continuing to innovate. It hasn't been easy, and there are still many days when I question whether I'm doing enough, but the journey has been incredible. The biggest lesson I've learned through all of this is that persistence is everything. There were so many moments when I wanted to quit, but I didn't. And while there's no guarantee that anyone who starts a business will make it, I can say that if you have a vision, the work ethic, and the resilience to push through, you can achieve things you never thought possible. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple. Start now. Don't wait for the perfect time because it will never come. Learn as you go, and don't be afraid to fail. Failure is just a stepping stone on the way to success. And remember, there's no such thing as an overnight success. Every entrepreneur's journey is unique, but it's the persistence that leads to greatness. Now, I look back at the young version of me, the one who didn't know the first thing about building an app or running a business, and I'm proud of how far I've come. It's not perfect, but it's mine, and it's the result of years of hard work, sleepless nights, and a deep belief in myself and my vision. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I'm ready to take on whatever comes next. I never set out to be an entrepreneur. In fact, if you had told me a few years ago that I would be running a successful online business, I would have laughed. I was the type of person who always had a steady job, a 9-to-5 routine, and I was content. I didn't think outside the box, much less dream of building something from scratch. But life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs, and sometimes, when things fall apart, they also fall into place. It all started when I lost my job. I had been working as a project manager for a mid-sized company for about 5 years. I liked the stability, salary, benefits, the whole 9 yards, but I never really felt like I was making an impact. It was just a job to pay the bills, and I didn't mind it. That was until the company hit a rough patch. The first round of layoffs didn't affect me, but when the second one came around, my name was on the list. At first, I was numb. It didn't seem real. I had always thought of myself as untouchable, a good employee. My manager had always praised my work, and I had a solid track record. But as the reality sank in, I was left with a single thought: what now? I remember sitting at home for days, staring at the walls. It wasn't just about the money, though that was a huge concern. It was more about the fear of the unknown. I had no idea how to start over. My resume was full of corporate buzzwords, but there wasn't much in the way of skills that would make me stand out in the job market. I wasn't a tech whiz, I wasn't a designer, and I wasn't a salesperson. I was just me. After a few weeks of moping, I decided to turn the situation around. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to do something. That's when I stumbled upon an idea that would change everything. One day, while scrolling through social media, I saw a post about a new trend. People were starting businesses from their homes, selling products they made themselves, and building entire brands online. Some were selling handmade jewelry, others were crafting unique skincare products. I had never thought about selling anything online, but something clicked. Maybe I could do something like that. I had always been a bit of a hobbyist when it came to woodworking. It wasn't anything extraordinary, just simple pieces like shelves and small tables. I had learned the craft from my grandfather, who was a skilled carpenter. Growing up, I spent a lot of time in his workshop, picking up tips and tricks along the way. When I left home and moved into an apartment, I didn't have much room for woodworking, so I'd let it slide. But now, with all this free time, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to reconnect with something I loved. The next few days were a blur of excitement. I didn't even know where to start. I scoured YouTube for woodworking tutorials, signed up for online courses, and research tools. I started small, making basic pieces, a few coffee tables and a couple of bookshelves, and listed them on Etsy. The initial sales were slow, and the feedback was mixed. Some people loved the craftsmanship, while others didn't see the value in what I was doing. But I didn't give up. Instead of just making generic pieces, I started to experiment. I combined different materials, wood, metal, glass, to create unique designs. I spent hours perfecting the finishing touches and getting the measurements just right. Slowly but surely, people started to take notice. The feedback became more positive, and I started to get repeat customers. I remember the first time I made a sale that felt like it meant something. It wasn't just a random order from someone in another state. It was from a couple who had been following my shop for weeks. They reached out to me, asking if I could make a custom bookshelf for their home. They loved my work, and the idea of creating something special for them felt amazing. That was the moment I knew I could do this. I had a real business. From there, things started to snowball. I began to refine my brand, creating a simple logo and updating my social media profiles to reflect my growing business. I started to focus on creating a story around my products, how each piece was handmade with care, how I used reclaimed wood from old barns and trees that had fallen naturally. The more I talked about my process, the more customers seemed to connect with it. It wasn't just furniture anymore. It was a piece of history, something they could be proud to have in their home. By the end of my first year, my shop was doing better than I could have imagined. I started making enough money to support myself, and I no longer had to worry about finding another job. The biggest change wasn't the financial freedom, it was the sense of pride and accomplishment that came with building something from the ground up. Every piece of furniture I made was a small victory, and every happy customer was a reminder that I was on the right path. However, the road wasn't always smooth. In the second year, I faced a serious challenge. My supplier for reclaimed wood ran out of stock, and it took weeks to find a new one. During that time, sales slowed, and I started to panic. I had to find a new way to keep the business afloat. I decided to experiment with a different type of material, modern plywood, while still maintaining the same rustic style. The new pieces were different, but they still carried my unique touch. To my surprise, they sold just as well as the wood pieces. It was a reminder that flexibility and adaptability were key. The most difficult challenge came when I realized I couldn't do everything on my own. For the first few years, I had done everything, designing, building, marketing, customer service, by myself. But as the business grew, it became clear that I needed help. I hired a couple of part-time workers to assist with the building and shipping. I also hired a freelance graphic designer to update my website and marketing materials. Now, I have a small team working with me, and we've expanded our product line to include custom-built furniture and home decor. We've even started offering consultations for people looking to redesign their spaces. My days are packed, but I'm never bored. Every day brings something new, and there's always room for growth. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. From the fear of losing my job to the excitement of building something meaningful, it's been an incredible journey. I never thought I was capable of running a business, but now, I can't imagine doing anything else. My advice to anyone thinking about taking the leap? Just start. The road will be tough, but with passion, persistence, and a little bit of luck, you can make it. I've been in the tech startup world for almost a decade, but I never planned on being an entrepreneur. In fact, I didn't even know what an entrepreneur was until much later in my career. I started out as just another coder, doing my thing at a tech company in Silicon Valley. Like most tech people, I had dreams of building something big, but never really considered doing it on my own. That all changed when I was 28, with a series of events that led me to where I am now, running a thriving software company. Let me take you back to the beginning of it all, and I'll try to condense the chaos of my journey as best as I can. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. My parents weren't rich, but they always emphasized the value of education. They were both teachers, and while they weren't business-minded, they instilled in me a love for learning. I was always the kid who could figure out how things worked, especially computers. By the time I was in high school, I was building websites for local businesses and learning to code just for fun. I didn't think much about it beyond using it as a way to make a little pocket money. After high school, I decided to go to college and major in computer science. My friends were all into the big dream of working at tech giants like Google, Apple, or Facebook, and while that wasn't necessarily my ambition, I figured it would be a safe bet. I graduated, moved out to California, and started working at a mid-sized tech firm as a software engineer. Fast forward a couple of years, and I had a decent job at a well-known startup. It wasn't glamorous, but I was learning a ton, and the pay wasn't bad. I had a small group of friends, and life was comfortable. But there was always this nagging feeling that I could be doing more. I wasn't passionate about the projects I was working on, and while my coworkers were all great, no one was really pushing the envelope in terms of innovation. Then, one fateful evening in 2015, everything changed. My company had just laid off a significant chunk of staff, and I happened to be one of the people they let go. At the time, I was devastated. I had been comfortable, secure, and while I didn't love my job, it was stable. Getting laid off threw me off, and for the first time in my life, I had no idea what to do next. I spent the next few months figuring things out. I was lucky in that I had a decent severance package, so I wasn't struggling financially, but the uncertainty of not knowing what was next was paralyzing. I'd go on job interviews, but every time, it felt like I was just going through the motions. Nothing excited me. One day, as I was browsing Reddit, a guilty habit of mine, I came across a post in a programming subreddit that mentioned a new tech trend, no-code platforms. The idea behind no-code was simple: allow people who aren't software developers to create applications and websites using visual interfaces. I had never really thought about the concept of no-code, but something about it stuck with me. I spent hours reading about the potential of no-code tools and started experimenting with a few of them. Fast forward to a month later, and I was knee-deep in building prototypes using no-code platforms. I was intrigued by how quickly you could go from idea to execution without writing a single line of code. But the more I used these tools, the more I realized they were far from perfect. They were buggy, limited, and often felt like they were designed by people who didn't really understand what developers needed. I saw an opportunity. Now, I wasn't completely ignorant about the challenges of starting a business. I had been around entrepreneurs my entire life, and I'd seen firsthand how difficult it could be. But I was also tired of sitting on the sidelines, waiting for the perfect job to come along. I figured, why not take a shot at this idea and build something myself? If it didn't work, I could always go back to the job market. So, with a mix of determination and a little bit of arrogance, I decided to build a better no-code platform. The next year was a whirlwind of late nights, product testing, and endless learning. I knew nothing about marketing, sales, or raising capital, but I was determined to figure it out. I found a co-founder, someone I met through a mutual friend who had a background in product management, and together, we began building the foundation of what would eventually become our startup. Building a product was the easy part. We quickly realized that the hard part was everything else: getting users, creating a business model, and raising funds. We bootstrapped the company for the first year, mostly by using savings and working side gigs on the side. Every dollar went into building the product, and we barely paid ourselves. It was brutal. We were often in survival mode, juggling customer feedback, coding, and business development while trying to stay sane. But as we gained traction, things started to take off. We began getting users, first from Reddit and other tech communities, then from word of mouth. Slowly, but surely, we gained credibility. We went to meetups, pitch events, and any opportunity to network with investors or potential customers. One pitch event in 2017 changed everything. We didn't win, but a Silicon Valley investor took notice of us, and after a few months of back and forth, we managed to secure our first round of seed funding. With the funding, we were able to hire our first full-time employees. We scaled our platform, improved the user experience, and slowly started to build a community around our product. By 2019, our platform had gained thousands of users. We were no longer just a side project. We were a real company. And yet, every step felt like one giant leap into the unknown. There were moments where I thought we were on the verge of burning out. We faced technical failures, lost customers, and even had a few toxic employees who nearly derailed the whole thing. But every time we stumbled, we picked ourselves back up. Today, we're a team of 50 people, and we've just raised our Series B round. Our platform is being used by startups, small businesses, and even large enterprises who want to build digital products without the need for expensive development teams. We've had some incredible wins, But I've learned the hard way that the journey of being an entrepreneur is never as glamorous as it seems. If I could go back and tell my younger self anything, it would be this. The most important thing isn't the idea, it's the execution. Everyone has ideas, but it's the people who can relentlessly execute, learn from their mistakes, and persevere through adversity who make it. So, here I am, 36 years old, running a tech company and constantly reminded of the fact that everything I have today came from a series of small, almost imperceptible steps that eventually led me to where I am. If you're thinking of taking the leap, don't let the fear of failure paralyze you. It's all part of the process. Thanks for reading. I've been running a small business for 5 years now, and I think I've finally learned a lot of the hard lessons that come with entrepreneurship. To put it into perspective, I started with absolutely nothing, no savings, no formal education in business, and no connections. I'm just a guy who had a dream, a work ethic, and a strong desire to make something out of nothing. I remember the day I decided to start my business. I was 25, working as a sales associate in a retail store, barely making ends meet. My life felt like it was stuck in a rut. I was constantly living paycheck to paycheck, and although I had a decent job, I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. Every day felt like the same grind, and I knew I couldn't keep living that way forever. I wanted to build something bigger than myself, to create something that could eventually give me financial independence and the freedom to do what I loved. But at the time, I had no idea what that something would be. One afternoon, after a particularly rough day at work, I found myself scrolling through social media and came across an ad for a product that seemed way overpriced for what it actually was. It wasn't the first time I'd seen something like it, but for some reason, that particular moment stuck with me. I thought, why does this cost so much? I bet I could find a way to create something similar, but cheaper, and sell it for a reasonable price. That was the spark that ignited the idea for my first product. I didn't have a clue about manufacturing, marketing, or how to run an e-commerce business, but I started doing research like crazy. I spent weeks watching YouTube videos, reading blogs, and browsing forums. I learned about dropshipping, online marketing, SEO, and product sourcing. I remember staying up late into the night, scribbling notes, and making rough sketches of what my product could look like. It was all so overwhelming at first, but the excitement of the idea kept me going. My first product was a small, simple gadget, something that could solve a minor problem in everyday life. I found a manufacturer overseas who could produce it for a relatively low cost. I had no experience with negotiating, and I was terrified that I would get scammed, but after what felt like hundreds of emails and phone calls, I finally placed the order. The first batch of 500 units arrived months later, and I couldn't believe it. I had an actual product that I could sell. I set up an online store, hired a freelance graphic designer to make the website look professional, and launched a small ad campaign on Facebook. I wasn't expecting to get rich overnight, but I was hopeful that at least a few people might buy the product. After all, I had no marketing budget and no brand recognition, just a product that I thought was useful. The first week after launch was a roller coaster. I spent hours checking my email and website analytics, hoping to see some sales come through. But nothing happened. No orders. No traffic. I felt defeated. It felt like I had poured all my energy into this venture, and it was just going to be another failed attempt at entrepreneurship. But I refused to give up. I took a hard look at what wasn't working and realized that I needed to refine my marketing efforts. I went back to the drawing board and started experimenting with different types of ads and content. I also reached out to a few influencers in my niche and offered them free products in exchange for reviews. Slowly but surely, things started to pick up. The first sale came through, and then the next, and then more after that. The first time I saw a positive cash flow was a huge moment for me. It felt like validation, proof that my idea wasn't completely crazy. But that didn't mean I had made it. Far from it. I still had so much to learn. I quickly realized that just having a good product wasn't enough. I had to figure out how to manage inventory, handle customer service, and maintain cash flow. I remember the stress of not knowing how to do everything. I had to learn how to deal with customer complaints, returns, and even dealing with scammers. There was one time when a batch of my product got delayed in customs, and I had angry customers demanding refunds. I had no idea what to do or how to resolve the situation. I felt like I was drowning in the responsibilities. But over time, I learned how to manage everything. I hired my first part-time employee to help with customer service and logistics. I started to better understand the financial side of the business, how to track profits and losses, how to manage cash flow, and how to reinvest profits into growing the business. As the business grew, I made plenty of mistakes along the way. One of the biggest mistakes was not properly budgeting for advertising. In the early days, I thought that Facebook ads would be enough to drive traffic to my site. But as the competition grew, it became harder and harder to stand out. I ended up wasting a lot of money on poorly targeted ads, and for a while, I was losing more money than I was making. Luckily, I eventually figured out how to properly budget for ads, how to create high-converting landing pages, and how to target the right audiences. I also expanded my marketing efforts beyond just paid ads. I started a blog, created educational content for my social media, and even launched an email list that I could use to nurture leads and increase sales. Over time, the business started to grow faster than I ever expected. I expanded my product line, added new features, and even partnered with other companies to sell complementary products. I learned the importance of building relationships with suppliers, customers, and influencers in my niche. There were still challenges along the way, but each time I faced a new problem, I took a deep breath and remembered that I had overcome challenges before. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And every time I hit a milestone, whether it was reaching my first $1,000 in profit or hiring my 10th employee, I knew that I was getting closer to the dream I had all those years ago. Now, 5 years later, I've scaled my business into something much larger than I ever thought possible. I have a small but dedicated team, a solid customer base, and a brand that people trust. I'm still learning, still growing, and still making mistakes. But I've also learned how to navigate those mistakes, how to learn from them, and how to keep moving forward. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. If you had told me 5 years ago that I would own a successful business and be living a life I never thought possible, I wouldn't have believed you. But here I am. The hustle is real, the grind is exhausting, and the rewards are hard-earned. But in the end, it's all been worth it. For anyone out there who's thinking about starting their own business, I can't stress enough, just start. It's going to be hard, but if you keep pushing through the tough times, the results can be life-changing. I was 22 when I first realized my dream wasn't just to work for someone else. I had been raised in a small town where people believed in the safety of steady jobs, good credit, and playing by the rules. But the moment I saw my first ad about becoming your own boss on TV, I knew I had to find a way to break free. I wasn't sure how to do it, but I knew I had to start somewhere. After college, I took a job at a marketing agency. It wasn't the worst job, but it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to own something, build something from scratch, and make my own decisions. The pay wasn't terrible, but I felt the walls closing in around me every day. The more I worked, the more I realized how little control I had over my own life. I wanted freedom, not just freedom of time, but financial freedom too. The idea of starting my own business seemed daunting, though. I had no idea where to begin. I thought about a few potential ideas: app development, social media consulting, maybe even selling stuff on Amazon. But nothing felt right. It wasn't until I started working on a personal project in my free time that I stumbled upon the idea that would eventually change everything. It started innocently enough. I had been learning how to design and print custom t-shirts as a hobby. My friends and family thought the designs were pretty cool, and one day my cousin suggested I make a small batch to sell online. I figured it was worth a try, so I started researching the logistics, which printing company to use, how to set up an online store, how to market it. I had no background in fashion or e-commerce, but I didn't let that stop me. I set up an Etsy shop and began selling my shirts. At first, it was slow going. I sold maybe 1 or 2 a week, and it felt like I was throwing my efforts into a black hole. I didn't know the first thing about SEO or advertising. I was just blindly throwing things at the wall to see what stuck. But I didn't give up. I knew that this was my shot to do something different. I spent hours every night learning. I watched YouTube tutorials about social media marketing, took online courses on search engine optimization, SEO, and read everything I could about building an e-commerce brand. Slowly but surely, I started to improve my listings. I optimized my product titles and descriptions, created better graphics for my t-shirts, and posted regularly on Instagram. Still, I wasn't seeing the kind of traction I wanted. Then one day, a local influencer with around 50K followers tagged my shop in a post about one of my shirts. I had never heard of her before, but she seemed to really like the design. Suddenly, my Etsy inbox was flooded with messages. Orders started pouring in. That was the turning point. I realized that social media could be a game changer if used correctly. I started reaching out to other influencers, sending them free shirts in exchange for shoutouts. I also started running targeted Facebook ads, which further increased my visibility. Business started to pick up, and I began making enough money to cover my expenses. But I wasn't content. I had a lot of room to grow, and I wanted more. My goal was to turn this side project into a full-time business, but I didn't have the luxury of quitting my job just yet. I had bills to pay, and the marketing agency job, while uninspiring, gave me a steady paycheck. So, I kept balancing both for months. During this time, I learned a lot of tough lessons. I realized that you don't always have control over when or how success comes. There were months where I thought I was on the verge of a breakthrough, only to have sales drop back down to almost nothing. There were times I nearly threw in the towel, but I kept reminding myself that every setback was just another opportunity to learn. A few months into this side hustle, I started to build a brand. My t-shirts weren't just t-shirts anymore. They were expressions of creativity and individuality. People who wore my shirts felt like they were part of something bigger. It wasn't about the product anymore. It was about the community I was building. The turning point came when I decided to go all in. I was making enough money from my business to support myself, and I realized that if I didn't take the leap now, I might never have the chance again. I quit my job at the marketing agency and poured everything I had into my business. I made the decision to invest in a custom website, hired a graphic designer to help elevate my brand's aesthetic, and started a YouTube channel to give people a behind-the-scenes look at the design process. My Instagram followers grew from a few hundred to thousands, and my sales continued to climb. I started offering limited edition designs, which created a sense of urgency among my customers. I also worked on expanding my product line, adding hoodies, mugs, and hats to the store. Eventually, I started collaborating with other small businesses to cross-promote and reach a wider audience. The journey wasn't easy. There were countless sleepless nights, customer complaints to deal with, and challenges with inventory and logistics. But with every challenge, I became better at running my business. I learned how to optimize my workflow, handle customer service more efficiently, and even build a team. By my third year, I had hired 2 employees to help with design and customer support, and my business was bringing in 6 figures a year. But the real joy came not from the money but from the freedom. I was my own boss. I was working on something I loved. And I was helping other small creators build their own businesses through collaborations. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. It feels like a lifetime ago that I was working that 9 to 5 job, feeling trapped and dreaming of something more. Now, I'm in control of my time, and I'm doing what I love every day. But I don't take it for granted. I know how quickly success can slip away, which is why I keep pushing forward, learning new things, and adapting to the ever-changing e-commerce world. It hasn't been a perfect journey, but every failure, every lesson, and every moment of doubt led me to where I am today. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple. Start small, learn as you go, and don't give up too soon. It's easy to get discouraged, especially in the beginning, but persistence is key. Also, never stop learning. The digital world is constantly evolving, and so should you. Building a business takes time, effort, and patience. But if you love what you're doing, the rewards are worth it. Trust me, you'll look back and realize that the hard work was all part of the adventure. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.